If you want to learn more about the topics of today's episode, visit the podcast website at naturesecretservice.com. Thanks for listening. Okay, everybody, here we go. This is Nature's Secret Service, the podcast that puts you in the room with the men and women of wildlife law enforcement. I'm Ed Newcomer, your host, former special agent with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we are midway through our season on wolves. I am super excited about our guest today. We have Mike Phillips with us. Mike is, and I'm going to say it, he's probably going to laugh and be more humbled, but this guy's a legend in the world of wolf reintroduction. In the earliest part of Mike's career, he was focusing on gray wolves in Minnesota, Michigan, and Alaska. But he went on to lead the effort to reintroduce red wolves in the southeastern U.S., which was really the first effort to restore a species declared extinct in the wild. In the mid-1990s, he worked for the National Park Service in charge of wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone National Park. He is the co-founder and executive director of the Turner Endangered Species Fund, and he's played a major role in Mexican gray wolf recovery in the southwestern U.S. and in the effort to restore wild wolves to Colorado. Mike, thanks so much for being on the program. I really appreciate it.
Well, Ed, thank you. You could have shortened that to simply say Mike is a glutton for punishment.
Hey, the other thing I forgot to mention, of course, is that you have a long history as an elected official. You served in the Montana State Legislature as a representative and later as a senator. And so you have a huge body of public service, which I want to make sure we recognize and say thank you on behalf of myself and all Americans for everything you've done for not only your state, but also this country. Thank you.
Well, you're very kind.
I'll tell you what. Anybody who works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and endeavors to protect endangered species is a glutton for punishment to some extent.
Hey, and you know, I can claim to have worked intimately with the two species that really piss people off. Gray wolves piss people off for sometimes good reasons, but oftentimes not such good reasons. And prairie dogs piss people off, man. And we've done a lot of work with prairie dogs over the last many years. We being Team Turner, have translocated over 15,000 prairie dogs, Ed, to establish suitable habitat for black-footed ferrets. Ferrets are an obligate carnivore in prairie dogs. If you don't have prairie dogs, you will not have ferrets.
100%.
So, I know that two species that really frustrate people. I know them well. Gray wolves and prairie dogs.
That is fascinating, and I'm going to add a little bit in here too, because I grew up in Colorado. I know prairie dogs and prairie dog issues well, and it's the two species that it's like I think the drama is a little overblown.
Oh,
the hatred of the two species is out of place.
Yeah, so here's a little story about being overblown and underblown.
Sure.
When I was in the state legislature, we were proud. This is years ago now. Proud to pass the Montana Sage Grouse Conservation Act. Right. And the states were coming together. Industry was the oil and gas industry and the agricultural industry coming together to advance sage grouse conservation, to keep the need to list the species under the Endangered Species Act at arm's length. You can make the case that if the good work that would be called for by the Act is being done otherwise, then you don't need the Endangered Species Act. So I was proud to cast that vote. And then I was proud to vote for a $10 million appropriation to fund Montana's sage grouse program. In the state of Montana, with fewer than 1 million residents, we have a smallish budget, a state budget. So for us, $10 million is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
And so for the sage grouse, which has real potential to compromise land use practices in the rural West,
sure,
practices related to ranching, practices related to oil and gas development, what the Endangered Species Act did was bring people together to do good work, to advance the persistence of the species without the heavy hammer of the Act. I'll hold that thought. Gray wolves, on the other hand, which have little potential to disrupt land use practices in the Rocky Mountain West. It is just a fact, Ed, that it's the atypical gray wolf that depredates on livestock. Yep. They do not have a big enough impact on big game to upset the big game hunting apple cart. Gray wolves are actually relatively easy to live with. They only require a modicum of accommodation. In contrast, the sage grouse, well, that's a tough puzzle. People came together to celebrate solving the sage grouse puzzle, which is tough. But what they do with gray wolves is scream to high heaven that, oh my gosh, the sky is falling if we've got gray wolves in Montana or gray wolves in Colorado. I was just struck that here's one species that really is a tough nut to crack, that being the sage grouse, and it brings people together. And another species that's easy to live with, the gray wolf, that divides people. It's just curious that there's this odd sense of what gray wolves mean, because it is not the reality. What people expect from gray wolves is not the reality in the woods.
100%. And you're not the only guest who's been on this season that has said something like that. And my view on it is a lot of what's going around about gray wolves seems to be what I refer to as information that has been passed from one person to the other over a beer at the local bar. It's just like it goes back to like fairy tale times. It's rumor and fear mongering and reactionary responses to an animal that has sharp teeth and big feet.
Well, prairie dogs have sharp teeth too, but
that's true. But little feet.
I would have you believe that the problem on behalf of the gray wolf goes back even deeper into time. I think the real obstacle to wolf recovery has been and continues to be the mythical wolf.
Oh yeah, 100%. Red Riding Hood, Little Red Riding Hood.
The sense that the species has some supernatural ability to exercise its predatory will on a whim, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Unfortunately, the myth is as strong as it is wrong. Here's what we know about gray wolves and their predatory habits.
Yeah.
And Ed, when I make reference to the natural history patterns for a gray wolf, know that they're undergirded by great science. The gray wolf is one of the most studied large mammals in the world. We know a lot about gray wolves. We know, for example, that most of the time when a gray wolf goes to work, and they got to go to work, they go to work every night. They go to work every night, and their job is to put, on average, about 5 to 7 pounds of food in their belly. They go many, many days with no food, but on average, that's the amount they need to consume to maintain a good body condition and to be surviving and able to reproduce. And so for them, the job is to put 5 to 7 pounds of food in their belly every night. We know, however, most of the time when they go to work, when they go to hunt, they fail. We know that almost approaching 8 times out of 10, they come up empty-pawed. We know that hunting is a dangerous prospect. I did a study years ago, Ed, looking at about 250 skulls, gray wolf skulls, that had been collected by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. These animals had been shot by ADF&G, Alaska Department of Fish and Game, to minimize predation pressure on a local moose population or caribou herd. So these animals had been shot. Okay. The skulls have been cleaned up, and I looked at the skulls for evidence of blunt force trauma. How often were the animals kicked in the head? And fully a quarter of the skulls I looked at showed a broken nose, a broken skull, a broken jaw. It's really hard to make a living in the woods with your teeth when you are hardwired to kill something that is much, much bigger than you.
Right.
They fail. Hunting is dangerous. They're not well built for the job at hand. The reason they are so wildly successful, they have, against all of these liabilities, they have 2 assets that turn the tide in their favor. They're doggedly determined. Ed, they get up about every night and they go to work.
Yeah.
And they are supremely social. Gray wolves are one of the most social large mammals in the world. They find great strength in numbers, and it is their determination and the sociality that allow them to thrive. But otherwise, theirs is a tough row to hoe. If you believe in reincarnation, you do not want to come back as a gray wolf.
It's too hard to work, huh?
Yeah, maybe a river otter, not a gray wolf.
Well, hey, before we jump into, you have the great thing about having you on the show in a season about wolves is you have experience with all the wolves that live in the United States, which is really cool. The red wolf, the Mexican gray wolf, the gray wolves now in Colorado, and of course the
Sure.
northern
And
Rocky.
Ed, I pride myself on objectivity. There's nobody else in the country that can make that claim, and there's no one else in the country that can make that claim and then also say, I've seen the issue of wolf conservation, both gray and red wolf conservation, from a decidedly policy and legal perspective,
right,
as a state legislator for 14 years. So I do have a well-rounded opinion of all of this.
Right. Which is exactly why I was so happy when you agreed to be on the program. I do want to I'm going to give a quick shout out to my niece because you're going to like this, Mike. My niece is studying wildlife biology at Colorado State, and she volunteers with the Black-footed Ferret Recovery Program. Yay. And she's been down many times. I've been with her a few times to Arizona. We've helped with captures and monitoring of black-footed ferrets down in Arizona.
That's great.
Oh, yeah, west of Flagstaff, which is a pretty cool program.
We have a rich effort with the Turner Endangered Species Fund, and that's a mouthful, so I'm largely going to refer to us as Team Turner. Because there are members of the Turner organization that don't work. This is my hat, Ed. You can see my hat.
I do.
Turner
I noticed,
Endangered Species Fund is the logo, but I refer to us as Team Turner. Team Turner's got a rich program on behalf of black-footed ferrets in South Dakota, with black-tailed prairie dogs, and Kansas with black-tailed prairie dogs, and also in New Mexico with Gunnison's prairie dogs. So thank your niece. She's doing God's work.
I'm telling you, she's loving it, and she knows she can tell stories about black-footed ferrets like nobody's business. She's into it, big time. So let's go to, so my listeners have a very solid base. 1995, I know the effort started before that, but the first reintroduction of wild wolves into the Yellowstone Park area with the idea that they would then repopulate the greater Yellowstone area. Can you describe why? Why did that effort come about? What was the purpose? What was the goal back in 94, 95?
Sure. It's a great question. Thank you. The recovery plan, and you know this, Ed, from your work as a special agent, the Endangered Species Act calls for recovery plans to be assembled that guide activities that would allow the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to say, we have created enough security for the species in question that federal protections can be lifted and the species in question can be managed by a state agency. It is a fact in this country that most wildlife are managed by state agencies, not the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a differential focus on migratory birds,
right,
and imperiled species that are considered by the Endangered Species Act. So, the recovery plan for the gray wolf in the northern Rocky Mountains said, okay, you got to have three populations that eventually will interact. Animals will go from population A to B, B to C, C to A. They'll be interacting one big population, call it a metapopulation, a population of populations. There need to be three strong. There was one that occurred naturally, gray wolves wandering in from Canada and northwestern Montana. Call that population one.
Okay.
It was conventional wisdom that the second and third populations would have to be brought about through reintroductions. That's what was the underlying rationale for reintroducing gray wolves to Yellowstone. It could become population two. And then at the same time we did the Yellowstone work, there was a companion project in central Idaho to reintroduce wolves there, and it became population number three. So ultimately, the reintroductions that were done in Yellowstone and central Idaho were all about satisfying the requirements of the recovery plan that said, if the federal government, the Fish and Wildlife Service, can establish three populations of a certain size and they are able to communicate genetically with one another, the federal government can say, we've satisfied our obligations under the Endangered Species Act, we're done, we're going home. Gray wolves will now be managed by Wyoming Game and Fish, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and Idaho Department of Fish and Game. And so that was the underlying rationale of reintroduction. It was widely believed that gray wolves would probably not move into the Yellowstone ecosystem on their own, that they would not move into central Idaho with sufficient certainty on their own for the Fish and Wildlife Service to step back and let gray wolves do it by their own wanderings. But beyond that, and you'll appreciate this, Ed, as a special agent, if you had stood back, if the Fish and Wildlife Service back in the day, 1991, 92, 93, 94, they stood back and said, we're going to let wolves do it on their own. They would have done so over a long period of time as fully endangered animals. When you look at the law, folks, the Endangered Species Act says you can't do much to manage an endangered animal that doesn't violate the law. And so, these endangered wolves are walking around. They kill your cows. They kill your dog. You can't do anything because they're endangered. In contrast, Ed, if the Fish and Wildlife Service chooses to reintroduce under a particular provision of the Endangered Species Act, it opens up a tremendous opportunity to create management latitude. So folks can get involved with hazing wolves that are harassing livestock. The folks can expect the Fish and Wildlife Service to exercise lethal removal if necessary to resolve a conflict with livestock. The advantage of reintroductions that was almost certainly going to succeed, it would be relatively cost effective, and it would create great management latitude. It's a great deal easier to live with a wolf that can be managed than one that can't.
Boy, that is a hugely important point that I think is missed. It is missed because you're absolutely right. If I could just say it in another way, maybe so other listeners get it, is that, if wolves had crossed the border, they would be fully protected under the Endangered Species Act, ESA. Right. And when an endangered species cannot be messed with, can't even be harassed, right? That's a violation. That's take.
The only thing you could do that would pass the smell test with the judge is kill an endangered species that was threatening your life.
Self-defense. Yeah, that's the only thing.
Thank you. Right.
100%. Yeah, self-defense. And that's the only thing that excuses people when they kill grizzlies.
And for the vast majority of species that are listed as endangered, that's a fine provision because they don't represent any threat to human safety. Gray wolves don't either. Gray wolves do not represent a threat to human safety, at least not a threat that's worth worrying about. But beyond that, gray wolves on occasion, rare occasion, can create problems. It is true that it's the atypical wolf that depredates on livestock. But if that statement is true, then if you believe in the bell-shaped curve, which I do, there are some atypical wolves.
Sure.
So in other words, on occasion, gray wolves are going to get stuck into livestock. Yeah. If they were not reintroduced and managed against the special provisions of the Endangered Species Act that allow for latitude in the field, your hands are tied. As a special agent, your hands would have been tied.
That's absolutely correct. And that is, it's one way to look at it is it's almost as if, in a way, the Fish and Wildlife Service was looking ahead and kind of did people a favor by doing this.
Of course they were. As a matter of fact, you go back and you look at the history of the law, it's this, Ed, but your listeners may not.
No, it's fine.
Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act that allows for animals to be reintroduced under what's called an experimental non-essential framework. And it allows for this relaxing of restrictions so you can exercise management latitude. Oh, fine. When that all came about, it was advocated by friends of mine and supported by legislators as a way to make the Endangered Species Act more effective, by making it more user-friendly, by recognizing that sometimes the animals that need help can cause problems, and they need to be managed. It was a beautiful stroke. Anybody that says the Endangered Species Act is not a common sense law that includes provisions to curry support from local folks simply doesn't understand the law. It is common sense, and it does have provisions that make it practical to implement in the field.
100%. It was my experience, too, working with the ESA in a pretty intimate way.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah, and that I think that dovetails into my next question for you or area of discussion is that, when this reintroduction effort was committed, there was a commitment to do it, and the first wolves were brought into Yellowstone and put in those orientation pens. Talk a little bit about what kind of response did you get from the local community, and what was the politics of it? Can you talk a little bit about the dynamics? Like, what kind of support were you getting from the agencies, the states, or not support, and the local people? What was it like?
Well, of course, there was local support and there was local opposition.
Sure.
Of course.
Yeah.
And let's say it was 50-50.
Okay.
Okay, fine. Here's the interesting thing about the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and the Endangered Species Act. That agency is properly named the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has the responsibility of listening to local voices. That's true. But also a national voice. It's the federal agency. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't just serve Montanans. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service serves all U.S. citizens. And from a nationwide perspective, there was overwhelming support for gray wolves to be reintroduced into Yellowstone to restore a population to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem that counted for recovery of the species. Overwhelming support. The local agencies were not interested in engaging. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Idaho Fish and Game, Wyoming Game and Fish Department, they didn't want to touch this thing with a 10-foot pole because it is controversial. Gray wolf recovery, gray wolf work is controversial. There is a provision of the law that says the Fish and Wildlife Service should go to great lengths to try to recruit the state game agencies to do the work called for by the law. And the Fish and Wildlife Service did that, and the state said, no thanks. So the states were no help at all at the beginning, and for good reason. Why in the world would they want to take on this big a project when they don't have to? So there was a local voice that was split 50-50, let's say, a strong nationwide voice saying go forward.
Right.
The state game agencies weren't the least bit interested. They were going to let the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service take all the shots. But please know, Ed, this work was being done in Yellowstone National Park and surrounding national forests. It was being done in national forests in Idaho. And the national forests are of concern to citizens nationwide, not just folks in Idaho. There was tremendous support for this program when you consider the context in which it was crafted. And that is a nationwide context, not just a Wyoming perspective. Right. And then you say, well, gee whiz, then the nation was putting on Wyoming. And I would say, no, it's not. But quite often, we as a country will move forward with a big voice, even though there's a smaller voice expressing opposition. And my 14 years in the state legislature, I thought long and hard about what constitutes good governance.
Yeah.
And here's what I concluded. It's rising to the challenge each and every day of balancing the tension between private needs and public needs. And sometimes we err on behalf of private needs. And sometimes we err on behalf of public needs. And it's a balancing act. It's a zigzag. You're tacking left and you're tacking right. But if you're making progress forward, that's what you should hope for with your government, balancing the tension between private and public, balancing the tension between states and the nation, balancing the tension between a local voice and a national voice. And with wolf recovery, I will go to my grave believing this. With wolf recovery, when the United States Fish and Wildlife Service chooses to engage, based on the best science, they do a hell of a good job.
Yeah. You know, I view the whole thing, that whole interest thing, because you hear that cliche argument a lot of, why are New Yorkers telling Wyomingites what they ought to do? And you hit the nail on the head, man. You and I, living in the West, we care about what happens to the Gettysburg battlefield. We care about what happens to the monuments in Washington, D.C. We don't live there. And so, people in New York and the East Coast have just as much right to care about what happens to federal land and federal species in the West as we do.
I would only qualify that slightly, Ed.
Okay.
I can choose to care about Gettysburg.
Yes.
And if I do choose to act on that concern, my voice should count just as much as someone who lives right outside the setting. I don't have to engage, but I can.
No, you can't, right.
And it's that option to choose to engage that connects us as a country. We're all in this together on issues that transcend state boundaries. I do not oppose state management of wildlife for the most part. I have been blessed, Ed, to work with state fish and game agencies all over the country. They do beautiful work.
Yeah,
but
for
they
sure.
are not as good as the United States Fish and Wildlife Service at dealing with imperiled species and species that have ranges that transcend state boundaries.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. That's why migratory birds went under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Yep.
Exactly right.
Exactly, because the states couldn't deal with it.
It's a nationwide issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I want to stay on this topic just a little bit longer because some of the special agents that I know, that I worked with, were actually assigned to go up there and provide like security and protection to the wolves that were in those, orientation or habituation pens or whatever they were called. I can't remember. But so that 50% that was opposed, there was a group of people in there that there was some concern that there could be violence against Park Service or Fish and Wildlife Service employees and or the animals. Is that overblown, or can you describe kind of what that was like? Was that a real fear of yours, or?
Yeah, the pens were called acclimation pens.
Acclimation pens, yeah.
In Yellowstone, we did maintain the animals in captivity for about 80 days to attenuate, to sort of dim their memory of home so that upon release they would be more likely to exhibit restricted movements. Okay, anyway.
Yeah.
Of course. And from the National Park Service's perspective, Yellowstone National Park can do amazing things. When the staff at Yellowstone National Park puts its mind to a task, they get that task done ahead of schedule and under budget. And they have a strong law enforcement component. The backcountry rangers that work in Yellowstone are top shelf conservation officers. So it only made sense that you go to the nth degree to ensure the security of the animals while they were confined during acclimation.
Yeah.
Would animals have been poached if we hadn't done that? I don't know.
Don't know.
Have those of us who've worked with wolves long enough been threatened? You bet. Most of us have had our lives threatened. Are the threats credible? Probably not. But do we have a long history in this country of knuckleheads sometimes taking matters in their own hands? Of course we do. There's knuckleheads the world over. There have been knuckleheads since Homo sapiens have wandered the planet for the last 300,000 years. Knuckleheads are just a fact of life.
Yeah.
And so anticipating that gee whiz, knuckleheads are reality, why not make sure? Because then if something happened, you could always say, no, Ed, we had 24-hour coverage, pal. That guy snuck in. And despite our best efforts, was able to conduct an unlawful activity. Or no, we busted his sorry ass, and because we were out, so we left no stone unturned.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. Talk about the first efforts. Like once those first wolves were released, did it meet your expectations? Did it exceed your expectations in terms of success? And how did that go when those first wolves were let loose from the acclimation pens?
Yeah, there were a couple of surprises. Overall, the restoration effort matured as I expected and was expected by many others because Yellowstone represents supremely suitable habitat that's highly secure. But before I get to the two surprises from Yellowstone, it is also important for folks to note the work in Idaho, which was going on at the same time,
right,
also was wildly successful. There were just two subtle differences between the two reintroductions. The work in Idaho entailed immediate release. Animal caught in Canada, taken to Idaho, taken to the end of a logging road, and let go.
Wow, okay.
There was no acclimation. In Yellowstone, we adopted a slightly different approach. We acclimated, as I said, for about 80 to 90 days in an attempt to attenuate a wolf's tendency to home. Like most mammals, gray wolves they tend to home, and so if you left them to their own devices, they're going to drift north. And when you look at Yellowstone, the very best habitat for gray wolves was the northern quarter of the park, right, which, as the crow flies, is about, say 50 or 60 miles from Livingston, not 60, but say 40, 50 miles from Livingston, Montana, and beyond. And we thought, well, gee whiz, we don't want them going north of Livingston. Yeah. What can we do to slow them down? What can we do to route them to the northern part of the park through restricted movements? That's why in Yellowstone we acclimated. In Idaho we didn't. Idaho population did really well. It jumped like a rocket ship. It actually grew more quickly than the population in Yellowstone. Both worked really well. Here are the two surprises from Yellowstone. The first related to the release. When we opened the gate, the wolves didn't come out.
Huh.
For many days, they didn't come out.
Huh.
And we thought, this is really odd. And then we started thinking about it, and it was clear that they didn't come out because they rarely went to the portion of the pen. The pen's covered about an acre. They weren't that big, but the wolves rarely went to the area near the pen during the entire time they were in captivity. And it was clear, Ed, they were avoiding that because that's where we came from.
Oh, the gate into the pen. Yeah,
we would drag meat in and then we'd leave, but we kept coming and going from that door.
Right.
And they didn't like that. They don't like being around us. We make them nervous. I don't know, maybe we smell bad, but we're shifty. You can't be counted. All that's
true.
Can't
be trusted.
Okay, so imagine you and I go to the pen, we open the gate and we leave. And if the wolves never get near the gate, they might not think anything, right? Moreover, I was of the mind that they really didn't know what going out meant.
Yeah.
So here's one thing that happened in captivity. They would bite at the chain link. Not near the door, but they'd bite on the chain link as far from the door as they could. So they got this notion in their mind that, oh my gosh, even in the presence of my determined biting, I can't get out.
Right.
So they're stuck, right? So it's on their mind that they're stuck. They don't want to go near the door. And I don't think they understood, I see chain link, I see an open door, I seen chain link, I could go out that. They didn't know. Okay, here's what we did. We said, well, shit, this isn't working. Like 5, 6, 7 days passed.
Wow.
So we went back to the pens, and we cut a hole in the fence in the portion of the pen where they spent most of their time. We called it the comfort zone.
Yeah.
Shit, man, they still didn't come out. We're like, what? They're running right by this hole right in the comfort zone. I thought, well, shit, oh dear, man, we didn't make the hole big enough. So after a couple of days of this, we went back to the place, and we took out the whole frickin' panel. And it was then that they came out, and boom, they were gone. I was surprised that it took them many days to get out. That was the first surprise.
Okay.
The second surprise, nearly upon release, and I think it's because gray wolves are pretty smart, nearly upon release, they were very observable. There are parts of Yellowstone that offer great big view sheds.
Yeah.
And you could sit and watch gray wolves live out their lives in places like Lamar Valley. To this day, gray wolves are highly sought after as a large mammal in the park to observe. They and gray wolves and grizzly bears are probably the two top species to see in the wild in Yellowstone. We had not expected, I don't remember any conversation about the observability of gray wolves being keen upon release. And the reason I think they're so observable, they rather quickly come to conclude, it doesn't matter if I hear that car door slam. It doesn't matter if I hear those voices a quarter mile away. They have never represented any kind of threat to me, so I'm going to ignore them.
Yeah.
And it's a consequence of Yellowstone being highly secure, Yellowstone offering a prey population that allows gray wolves to occur at a reasonable density, and Yellowstone offers these great big view sheds where you can see across a big landscape and you can watch gray wolves chasing elk. We didn't expect they'd be slow to come out. We didn't expect they'd be so observable. Everything else went as planned, ahead of schedule, under budget.
Nice. And did they stay true to the area? Did they stray from the park, or what was their?
One of the groups stuck around and really seemed to be impressed by acclimation. Two other groups wandered more widely. Management actions got involved, so it's hard to know where they would have ended up if we had left them alone.
Okay.
But we know for sure when you look at post-release movements, on average, the wolves released in Idaho went a great deal further and mostly north compared to wolves in Yellowstone, who traveled much shorter distances. The best measure I can give you about the success of the approach in Idaho and Yellowstone, it's simple. Within about 8 years or thereabouts, the Idaho population was 100 and growing.
Okay.
That's great. 37 wolves released in Idaho, and within just a few short years, 5 to 10 years, they had given rise to a population that was growing that was stronger than 100 animals.
Okay.
Yeah, similarly, in Yellowstone, within about 10 years, we were pushing at that 100-animal mark. And I had said to Doug Smith, and I still believe this to this day, in Yellowstone, we let 31 animals go from Canada, and Idaho let 37 go. I don't think, Ed, the first batch was 14 strong that we let go in Yellowstone. The second batch was 17 strong. I don't think we needed the second batch of 17.
No kidding.
I think the first batch of 14 probably would have been sufficient. There was no disagreement after the second round of reintroductions involving those 17 additional wolves from Canada. No one was arguing for a third round.
Really? Okay.
It worked really, really well. The Fish and Wildlife Service did a heck of a job. The National Park Service did a heck of a job. And the landscapes, the wild landscapes of central Idaho and Yellowstone did great jobs too.
Well, and part of that was there was plenty of elk, right? Lots of elk at that time.
Gray biomass is critical. Gray wolves aren't complicated. In areas where human-caused mortality is low, wolf population dynamics are largely decided by prey biomass.
Okay.
In other words, if they're not getting shot and poisoned by us, if they've got enough food to eat, they're going to do quite well.
How did the killing of Wolf 10 was kind of a famous moment. I think it was the first poaching incident of one of the released wolves in Yellowstone. How did that impact the kind of the outlook of the program at the time? Do you recall? And how did, because I believe Wolf 10 was one of the breeding pair of an important release group of wolves, right?
It was a flashpoint of concern, and I got a shout out to one of your colleagues from the ranks of special agents, a guy named Tim Eicher.
Tim Eicher he's been on the show, yeah.
Tim did a hell of a job making sure that Chad McKittrick paid the price.
Yeah.
McKittrick shot, skinned, and beheaded number 10 for no good reason. Mm-hmm. His buddy, who was with him at the time, a guy named Dusty Steinmazel, was reported to have said that Chad said, "That's a fucking wolf, I'm going to kill it." And he did. Shot it, skinned it, beheaded it for no good reason, and Eicher busted him. Beautiful work by Tim.
Sure.
From my perspective as the senior field biologist, it drew attention to the need to continue to press forward with good field work because we had so few animals involved in the program at that time. There was no guarantee of success. There were so few wolves involved at the time that number 10 was killed. Let's say there might have been 10 wolves involved at the program. 10 was killed right at the beginning of the work.
Right.
That I was certain that we needed to go to great lengths to ensure the survival of every wolf we knew about.
Right.
And so the response to the poaching of 10 was to redouble efforts in the field to promote survival. This created some problem with the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Hold that thought.
Okay.
I came from northeastern North Carolina to run the Yellowstone Project, and I was the only person in the nation at that time that had run a wolf restoration project based on reintroductions. And that was the red wolf work in the southeastern United States.
Right.
And if you understand the Southeast, it's small landscapes, a lot of private land. There was no way you could responsibly let red wolves go and not have a very, very, very intensive field program. We were out all the time making sure that wolves weren't creating problems for people. Very, very intensive management. I brought that mindset to Yellowstone, and the mindset served the Yellowstone Project very well at the beginning because there were so few wolves involved. They deserved great care on our part to ensure their survival. In contrast, my U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service colleagues were more willing to just let things be. They were more willing, it's not a big deal, Mike. They'll figure it out. We don't need to worry about this. They'll figure it out. And I kept saying, that's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit. You put them out there. We put them out there. They're our responsibility. There's only 9 or 10 or 11 of them. Everybody counts. It's absolutely bullshit to walk away from the challenge of intensive field work. Now, you think, well, why was this such a big deal? I didn't work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at that time.
Right.
I was wearing a green uniform for the National Park Service, effecting important field work to advance the survival of wolves from Yellowstone outside the park.
Right.
It was not something the Fish and Wildlife Service was predisposed to imagine as essential. And for me, It was like water on a duck's back. This is what you do.
Right.
At the beginning of a restoration project, based on reintroductions, you go to great lengths to promote survival because they're your responsibility. The art form of restoration through reintroductions is to know when you back away. When you've got 5 or 6 animals on the ground, oh my gosh, they're all very important. When you got 55 or 65, now everybody's not quite so important. Then you begin to back away a bit and let nature take its course. It's a balancing act. And I was convinced with the killing of number 10, we certainly were not where we would need to be to justify walking away.
Yeah.
So his death prompted a great deal of intensive field work on our part for another year or two to ensure the animals that were left succeeded.
Well, I think, one of the examples of how those great lengths he went to was at the time Wolf 10 was killed, his mate wasn't too far away, and she was like super pregnant. I think she gave birth the day or two later after his death, right?
Yeah. I mean, Ed, she might have already, but you're right. She was saddled with a litter. We knew that nothing else would explain what she was doing. And so here she is by herself.
Right.
Her mate's dead. And, most folks wouldn't know this, but all of this took place on the northern flanks of a spot called Mount Maurice. Mount Maurice. It's a rather modest mountain in Montana. No big deal, rounded at the top. But Mount Maurice sits on the southeastern flank of Red Lodge, Montana. I could sit in my hotel room in the Motel 8 in Red Lodge, put my headphones on, stick my antenna out the window of the hotel, and hear their radio signals.
Whoa, okay.
So they were within spitting distance of Red Lodge.
Yeah.
So when he's dead, and she's not going anywhere because she's got a den, the idea of not intervening, the idea of not catching those wolves and bringing them back is bullshit. Of course you intervene. You get mom, you get the puppies, and you bring them back to the park, which is exactly what we did.
Perfect example of that intensive management at the early stages of the reintroduction, right?
And I would be the first to admit, when you engage in those kinds of field activities, there's no room for error.
Yeah.
So let's imagine, Ed, you and I are doing this work, and we catch mom. And we know it's mom. We see her teats. We can express milk from her teats. We know she's still nursing. We've got mom. But we don't get the puppies.
Yeah.
At that point, all we could do, Ed, would be let mom go.
Right.
And while it's not that hard to catch a naive wolf, once they've been caught once or twice, they get pretty smart.
Yeah.
So if you got your hands on mom, boy, the clock is ticking to get the puppies. It is admittedly a high-stakes operation. It was always my attitude is, well, fuck it, we won't fail.
Yeah. Huh? How the heck did you find those? That's okay. This is a beautiful thing about a podcast is you can say whatever you want.
Well, you just can't afford to fail, and we didn't.
How the heck did you find those puppies after you caught the female?
We knew where she was spending her time.
From the radio collar, right?
We flew, and we'd circle the plane right above her, and she's right down there.
And that's the other thing important to note. These wolves at this time, every single one of them's collared, right?
Well, mom was. The puppies weren't, but all the other
of course,
adult,
the puppies weren't. Yeah,
everybody that we released wore a radio collar. Sure.
Right.
And so we knew where she was keeping the puppies, and we had time wasn't an obstacle. We knew we had a week or 2 or 3 before the puppies would start moving around to any degree.
Yeah.
So we set up mom to increase the odds that we could catch her when we wanted to catch her. So we caught her and basically walked right to the spot where we expected the puppies to be, and there they were. And we grabbed them all and take them back to Yellowstone Park and put them in a pen. And at that point, Ed, the aim was simply to grow them up to 35, 40, 45 pounds. So they were big enough to go toe-to-toe with any coyote. And then we were going to let them go again. Interesting.
Very cool. But in that intensive effort, you ended up kind of like, it was a very purposeful success, right? I mean, how many puppies did you retrieve from her den there outside the park? 8. So now 8. You lose a wolf outside the park, but you go back into the park now with 9 wolves that you're going to get back into the park, try to get oriented to staying in the park or being safer. So that was, in a sense, a very well managed success out of a not failure, but a horrible event where you lost this important wolf.
It was simply the thing to do, and I'm of the mind that if you've given proper thought to something and it clearly is the thing to do, and you've done the best you can, and it doesn't work out, because you can never guarantee success. You could just go to the great degree to promote success. Then I could say, Ed, I'm sorry, pal, we did the best we could.
Right.
We got 6 puppies. We saw 2 run away, and we couldn't catch them. The key to this kind of operation, because you can't leave young wolves on their own. And she was still nursing, so these are little bitty guys. The key is to simply be smart about how you do it. And if you can't get it done properly, you admit defeat and you let animals go. If you and I done it, I knew we had one ace in the hole. Let mom go.
Yeah.
Let mom go. Now, what she probably would have done in the presence of that degree of harassment, we catch her, we hang on to her for 12, 18 hours. Ah, shit, man, we still don't have the puppies. We got to let mom go. She probably would have been so bothered by all of that, she would have moved the litter.
Yeah.
And it's not the end of the world for gray wolves to move puppies from here to there, but all things being equal, you don't want to be the reason that she's moving them.
100%.
We did the best we could, and in each case where we had to intervene, so the Rose Creek pack wasn't the only pack. We did the same thing to the Soda Butte pack. It's a different story, but the same idea. It was even a little more complicated with those guys because there were more wolves involved. But they were in a bad spot. They had a litter. They had a den. We can't leave them here. This is an accident waiting to happen. We don't have the luxury of saying, oh, there's 202 wolves. Tell them if we have to shoot those guys, it doesn't matter to the population. We couldn't say that. And so each and every time we went out and did this intensive work, we were just as well prepared as we could be and willing to say we did the best we could. Sure. Nobody can fault you.
Sure.
If you really, truly, sincerely did the best you could as a public employee, who's going to fault you? And if they do, to hell with them.
Yeah, screw them.
To hell with them.
Yeah. That comes into a whole other discussion we could have someday, you and me, about how public employees tend to be punching bags for the rest of the world.
Yeah, I never saw a $400 hammer.
I never saw a $400 hammer either.
No, I saw hardworking people that busted their ass on behalf of this country, and I was proud for a time to be one of them.
You know what? You and I worked for different parts of the same Department of Interior and different parts of Interior. And, I totally agree. Throughout my career, there were maybe 10% duds here and there because every place you work is going to have some duds. But 90 to 95% of the employees I worked with were conscientious, hardcore people who cared about saving money for taxpayers and doing a good job.
That's exactly right.
100%. So we have a lot to talk about, Mike, and I don't want to abuse my time with you, but just briefly, let's wrap up on the Yellowstone wolves. There's one thing I want to touch on with you, though, and you've already touched on this a little bit, but how do wolf populations interact with their habitat and the prey species? So, there's a lot of talk about out there. You've heard them. We've all heard the myth that wolves are destroying hunting opportunities for elk hunters and deer hunters. Can you just talk a little bit about how they do interact and affect prey populations and prey behavior, and then how you measured that?
Sure. Gray wolves have done very well in the northern Rocky Mountains. Because of the reintroductions in Idaho and Yellowstone, you now have three populations that interact: Idaho, northwestern Montana, and Yellowstone. From a numerical perspective, it's been a wildly successful program. And some time ago, and we can talk about how delisting, how the lifting of federal protections actually came about. It's a fascinating story about the interplay between science and politics.
Yeah, frustrating.
But in the northern Rocky Mountains today, and let's assume that conservatively between the greater Yellowstone and northwestern Montana and Idaho, there's say, 2,000 wolves on the ground. But despite that number of animals, they don't kill many livestock. As I've said now for the third time, it's the atypical wolf that kills livestock.
Yep.
In Montana, as an example, on average, gray wolves each year are going to kill about 50 head of cattle and, say, 50 head of sheep. If those numbers aren't right, they put you in the universe. There are, between cattle and sheep, well over 2 million of those animals in the state of Montana.
And we've mentioned on this podcast before, just if you look at USDA records, the cause of death of domestic animals out in the wild is not predation, it's disease.
Yeah. So, gray wolves are not influencing the viability of ranching in the Rocky Mountain West. Similarly, when you look at gray wolves and native prey, elk and deer, for example, all three states, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, consistently say, gee whiz, come to Wyoming. We got record numbers of elk and deer and record hunting opportunities. Montana, there's more deer and elk in the state today than there were before gray wolves were reintroduced. There is no evidence at all that gray wolves are impacting native prey populations to such a degree that hunting is now an unsuccessful endeavor in the state of Montana. It's not.
Yeah.
That said, we know that gray wolves can affect prey population dynamics, and certainly in small areas. And so, Ed, it might be true that your favorite honey hole, as a kid you hunted it 30 years ago, and my gosh, and now it's harder. And that may be the case, but there's still great opportunities to hunt big game in Montana. The opportunities may not be distributed the way they were historically. We know in the state of Montana, for example, that many of the elk management units that are in wolf country support more elk than the state would wish. There is tremendous opportunity for big game hunting in Montana and Wyoming and Idaho. Those are the facts. Now this is a fact too. Despite that, no significant impact to big game hunting, no significant impact to the livestock industry. Despite that, the level of violence perpetuated on gray wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains is stunning.
Yeah,
and I never expected it, and it is allowed by laws and regulations passed by elected officials and enacted by appointed officials, wildlife commissioners, for example, that allow excessive, needless killing of gray wolves, ostensibly because there's too many. And then I would say to my colleagues in the Senate, I said, wait a minute, there's too many gray wolves in Montana, huh? Why? And they'd cite livestock and big. I said, hang on. Our Department of Livestock has the data. Our Fish and Game Department has the data. The data they have don't support your claims of conflict. And so I've concluded, Ed, that this ridiculous amount of violence, needless killing, is a consequence that decision makers don't give a shit.
Yeah.
They don't give a shit. They are, on average, I would have you believe, ecological illiterates. They don't know that predation is a very important ecological process, and consequently, they don't give a shit about predators. They don't give a shit. One little story about how much disregard they will exhibit. The last bill I brought in the Montana Senate, it was a simple little bill. Little bill that said you can't torture coyotes to death.
Good bill.
You can't torture coyotes to death. You can't run them down with a snowmobile and run them over repeatedly to kill them.
Right.
I bring the bill to the Senate Fish and Game Committee. I was the ranking minority member at the time, and I knew what my committee members were going to do. It was tabled. The bill was tabled on a party line vote. Republicans said, this is a shitty idea, Mike. Table this bill. Mm-hmm. My Democratic colleagues said, no, we should pass it to the full Senate. So the bill gets tabled. And before I go any further, Ed, please know, all the bill said was you can't run them over with a snowmobile as a form of torture. You can still hunt them with the snowmobile. You can still run that little coyote to the point where she can't take another step. She's laying in the snow, exhausted, looking up at you. At that point, Ed, you got to kill that animal in some humane manner. It said nothing about how many animals you could kill. It simply said you can't torture them to death. So the bill's tabled in committee, and I said, okay, fine, fuck it. I knew that was going to happen. So as a sitting senator, it was my right. I could say to the full Senate, gee whiz, guys, our Fish and Game Committee made a mistake. They tabled this important bill. I move that we take that bill away from that committee and bring it to the full Senate for consideration.
Love it.
I made what's called a blast motion. I'm going to blast the bill out of the committee. So here's how that works. I stand up and I say to the chairman of the day, Mr. Chairman, I move to remove Senate Bill 221 from Senate Fish and Game and put it on our agenda for tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At that point, the chairman says Senator Phillips, and I have the chance to take 15, 20, 30 seconds to speak about the procedural motion. I'm not lobbying for the bill so much. I'm lobbying for the idea that it needs to be discussed. And I said, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Senate, I hope you'll support this procedural motion. Senate Bill 221 is a simple little bill to prevent torture of coyotes. If we knew, folks, if we knew that we had a kid, a young boy in our neighborhood using his bicycle to run over the neighborhood cats, we'd be concerned for that boy's mental health. Montanans are better than torturing animals to death. We need to talk about this bill. Please support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Nice.
I sit down. It's a non-debatable motion. We got to vote. That, and I had whipped. I told my Republican friends, this is coming. Please support me. I'd served with many of these guys for 14 years. I played poker with them. I drank their whiskey. I said, help me out here, guys. I'm not saying you got to vote for the bill, but let's at least have the discussion.
Yeah.
That motion died on a party line vote. 18 Democrats said, sure, we ought to talk about that idea, and 32 Democrats said no. I said, okay. After the session ended that day, I went up to a friend of mine, a guy named Fred Thomas.
Okay.
Fred was the majority leader, Republican majority leader, friend of mine. I said, Fred, my God, Lord, dude, you couldn't even throw me a bone on this pursuit. What? My gosh, man. And he said, yeah, Mike, you were really looking out for us with that idea. I said, Fred, what kind of people do you represent that would want you to stand in support of torturing coyotes to death? At that point, I had to walk away from Fred. But from that point forward, Ed, for the last month of my service as a Montana senator, I could not pray with my colleagues. Every day when the Senate comes together as a full Senate, the committee of the whole Senate, we do two things to kick off the work. We say a prayer, typically a Judeo-Christian prayer, and then we pledge allegiance to the flag. From that day forward, I would step into the anteroom when the prayer was being delivered. I could not cotton their hypocrisy any longer. I don't know what God worth worshiping would want you to torture one of her creations. When the prayer was, I stood in the anteroom. I was polite. I didn't make a fanfare. I'm out there minding my own business.
Yep.
I could hear the prayer end. I'd step back into the chamber, notably on the Republican side of the aisle, and pledge allegiance to the flag, and then I'd go sit down. And it was so hard for me. And I'd served with these guys for years.
Yeah.
And I could no longer bring myself to pray with them.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't see the wisdom of standing against torturing coyotes to death.
Well, and I think we're seeing the same thing perpetuating itself in the West. And there's been some perfect examples in the news of wolves being tortured. And like you said, just pretty violent, aggressive ways that people are going after wolves. It's not like they're hunting wolves, they're killing wolves, torturing and killing wolves.
It's a degree of needless violence that I never anticipated. I have not ever stood in opposition to lethal removal of gray wolves to resolve a conflict.
Sure. At
some point, if you've tried all these other things and you still have a problem, I don't even stand in opposition to fur trapping. We sapiens have used fur for as long as we've walked this planet, call it 300,000 years. And if I'm going to go out and shoot a ring-necked pheasant because I like bird hunting, I can't criticize somebody for being a responsible fur trapper.
Yeah.
No.
And it's responsible that is the key. And a friend of mine describes it as hunting is the process of going out and, tracking, stalking, and then humanely killing. It's not some sort of thrill kill. It's not some sort of joyous activity that you go out and you laugh and you giggle the more the animal suffers.
I would say to folks that are listening, gray wolves are really good at what they do when they get a toehold. Gray wolves are going to persist in the northern Rocky Mountains, but we need a different collection of elected and appointed officials that will change the rules and regulations so needless killing isn't so commonly taking place.
Yeah, I think you may have just answered the next question I was going to ask you. Is I think my assumption from hearing you talk is that, your overall thoughts on success are it's been successful.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, very much so.
And I will say, in ways that, at least one way that was never imagined, and it speaks to my current outfit, the Turner Endangered Species Fund. People will ask me, what's the value of gray wolves in Yellowstone? And lots of people cite Yellowstone, and lots of people speak about trophic cascades and the ecological consequences of wolf predation. No, those are fine answers. For me, the significance of Yellowstone's Wolf Project is that it gave rise to bigger ideas, that the Yellowstone Wolf Project was a birthing ground for bigger ideas that might never have surfaced if that project had not gone forward. The best example I can give you is the Turner Endangered Species Fund that Ted and I co-founded back in, conceptually, intellectually, we were connected in 1995 and 1996. We actually functionalized that connection in 1997. Ted was motivated by the inspiration he gained by many things, including the Yellowstone Wolf Project. I was motivated by my experience with red wolves and gray wolves and private land, because ultimately what the Turner Endangered Species Fund aimed to do was illustrate that private land could be managed to be beachheads of security for species listed under the Endangered Species Act. Ted and I came together on this common ground of making sure everybody understood private land can really matter. On purpose, it can really matter. And since day one, Ed, the Turner Endangered Species Fund has stood as the most significant private effort in the world to use reintroductions of imperiled species to restore viable populations to private land, populations that count toward federal recovery objectives.
Yeah.
That is all a consequence, to some extent, the inspiration that Ted drew from the Yellowstone Wolf Project.
Very, very cool. The more private-public collaboration is needed because it's always successful. Okay, Mike, I think that is the perfect way to end our discussion on the gray wolves in the Yellowstone area of the Northern Rockies. We're going to split this episode into 2 episodes, and when we come back next week, we're going to jump to red wolves and Mexican wolves and Colorado wolves. Okay, everybody, thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our interview with Mike Phillips. We'll see you next time for part 2. Thanks for listening. Nature's Secret Service is written and produced by me, Ed Newcomer, and is co-produced by the DHTV team here at California State University, Dominguez Hills. Follow us on social media and connect with us online at naturesecretservice.com.